Hello, good evening, everybody, and welcome once again to the final Environment, Community and Safety Scrutiny panel for this year, which is being held at the 16th of March at the George Meehan House. Welcome to the officers, the councillors and members of the public. The meeting, filming at this meeting, so the meeting will be filmed. And there's apologies. Any apologies, Philip?
So I've had apologies from Councillor Hymas and Councillor Emery.
Thank you. Urgent business?
There's no urgent business, Chair, but it's just a note that on the published agenda under item 10, there was a fly tipping update marked to follow. That'll be coming as a verbal update instead.
Thank you very much. Noted. Any declarations of interest? I'll take that as none. Okay, so can I ask that we keep to the timings? We have a busy agenda this evening, and I would like the meeting to finish within 3 hours, hopefully less. Also remind officers to keep their introductions to the reports as well as the responses to questions as brief as possible so we can focus on the questions. As we said, apologies have been received from Councillor Emery, and there's no items of urgent business. Deputations, petition presentations, questions?
We don't have any deputations, petitions, presentations or questions. We did receive a number of deputation requests that were late and they didn't relate to anything on the agenda. So I've contacted those people and asked if they would like to come to the following meeting of the panel instead and speak to us.
Thank you very much for that update. Can we have 5 minutes to approve the minutes of the last meeting, please? The minutes of the 14th of November. That was the 15th of December, error.
Sorry,
Does anybody have any comments on the minutes? Can I say that they're agreed? Okay. Agreed. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to do some slight shifting around, but the first agenda item is the leisure centre updates. That's a verbal update, and that's from Simon Farrow.
Mark.
What's this?
Yeah, it is.
Sorry, another error, because I was thinking Mark Stevens don't look like Simon Farrow, but there you go.
Not at all, Chair. I don't
Thank
like
you very
like
much.
it.
Thank you very much, Mark.
Thank you, Chair. Simon's unable to be here this evening. He's been in the High Court this afternoon in relation to a particular other issue that's going on elsewhere in the borough. So in terms of the slides, if Philip brings those up. Fabulous, thank you. Then going to the, what I'm going to try and cover, if you go to the next slide, please, Philip. I'm going to try and go through the items. You see them on the overview, but if you head into the next item, please, next slide rather. I'm going to mainly focus in on Tottenham Green and Park Road leisure centres this evening because they're the two biggest that we have in the borough, managed by Fusion on our behalf. As part of a 20-year contract that we are currently halfway through. The issue at Tottenham Green has been one of the ingress of water into the plant room, which is the lowest part of the centre, causing significant problems, mainly because the high voltage electricity system sits on the floor of the plant room. Everything else is on a plinth. If you go to Park Road, all of the equipment there, the electrical equipment, all on a plinth. So when water started ingressing, it basically blew the entire system, and it was so severe that UK Power Networks had to cut the power off. And we've still got the issue of water still coming into the room, which is a major issue. However, with that power cut, it basically meant that the whole thing had to shut down. We've been trying to identify the source of the water, but we do know it's not coming from the swimming pools because we've analysed the water itself. You can't really see on the middle picture at the bottom of the previous slide, but you would be able to see it in your pack that that complex equipment, the electrical equipment, is actually sitting on the floor. That's where the blowouts has actually occurred. So that's been our major issue there. So if you can go on to the next slide, please, Philip. So it's basically blowing two systems, high voltage system and a low voltage system. And there's a number of other pumps that require repair and inspection there, which will follow on from us restoring the low voltage system. I'll come on to the program at the moment, in a moment, but restoration of the low voltage system is the easiest option in terms of moving things backward. And by doing that, we can actually bring the library, customer service centre, the creche nursery back into play, as well as the gym as well. But the swimming pools are far more complex because they rely heavily upon the high voltage system. And when we do get that high voltage system back into play, we'll then actually run through the testing of all the other equipment in the centre itself. So you can go to the next slide, please. So we've been pressing Fusion for a rectification plan in terms of how they'll actually bring the entire centre back into play. The focus therefore has been primarily on getting the low voltage system back into operation because that is the easiest. So there's a whole array of works that needs to be taking place at Tottenham Green, which they started on site on Monday. So that's the electrical contractor's gone in there. The cost of actually getting that side sorted out is £80,000 for the electrical work. However, part of the problem is that after they've actually done the electrical work, we've then got to test all the equipment that relies upon the electrical work. So it'd be the things like the burglar alarm system, the fire alarm system, all of the heating system. The lift needs to be brought back into operation as well to actually make sure the entire dry side of the centre can actually operate. So the timescale shown down here gives an indication that in terms of the work that started on Monday, we're hopeful that by the 31st of March, all that electrical work will have been finished. We can then move on to testing of the rest of the equipment in the centre and then bring the whole of the centre back into use. We think that's going to take a few weeks, but we've got a meeting. I've got a meeting tomorrow with Fusion to get an update on where things are in terms of the progress made this week. And equally, what will happen is, as we move forward each week, there'll be a press statement given by Councillor Williams in terms of where we are, the progress being made. But in actual fact, the fact that Fusion got in on the 13th of March was actually a day ahead of their original rectification plan when they sent that through. It's because the electrical contractors were able to mobilise a day early. So that's where we are with the low voltage system at Tottenham Green. If you can go to the next slide, please. However, the water coming into the pump room, into the plant room, is still causing an issue. We've tried investigating in a number of different ways with our own testing people. Fusion have brought testing people in as well. And in a meeting last week, I asked the question: have we actually ever got to a point where we've drained all the water out of the plant room? That has been the case, even to the point where there are actually sump pumps in there to actually just take out all the water if anything goes in there. And those are the very lowest level of the plant room. And we've actually taken it right the way down to the concrete that those sump pumps are based on, and the water is actually coming up through the concrete. So it's coming up from underneath. From the testing, we've identified there's fecal matter in there, which suggests it is foul water. So it seems a bit weird that we've actually got that water coming through, which suggests there's a problem with the foul water sewer that runs underneath the centre. We've actually had Thames Water out on a couple of occasions, asking them to test. They think that there is nothing wrong with their system. which is a bit weird because any foul sewer will be continuous to responsibility of Thames Water. So what Fusion are doing at the moment is trying to get a separate company to come in and actually do some excavation work underneath the sump pumps to actually really understand what's going on and really get to the bottom where this water is coming from. That's going to be quite an important step in terms of moving forward with the progression of the restoration of the high voltage system. However, in the meantime, what they're doing is actually using a different set of contractors to look at the high voltage system and identify how they can basically rebuild the entire high voltage system, but do so by lifting it up onto a plinth. So there's lots of components to come out, plinth to go in, rebuild the system afterwards. Significantly higher cost in terms of doing that work. And it's going to be a long process. We estimate about 16 weeks to actually do that once we're actually made a start. We're not wholly dependent upon finding the source of the water to start that work off, but we do need to make sure we've got a robust plan in place in terms of actually getting the high voltage system up and running. Part of that is actually dependent upon the work that's taking place at the moment in relation to low voltage, because there's only one space you can actually work in. We just want to make sure that gets operational. We've then got some lighting in the building. We can then start to really look at what's going on with the high voltage system, and the people down there can work safely and not get on top of one another. Happy to take questions at this stage on Tottenham Green, or alternative chair, I can keep on going in relation to Park Road and follow that through.
Apologies. I don't know if anybody heard me online. My apologies. I'm just reiterating that I'm going to allow people to ask questions so that we grasp it before we move on to Park Road.
I was just going to say that for me, my questions are broader in relation to fusion, I think. So,
have you got any questions?
I do.
Yes.
Thank you, Chair. You'll remember that, or you may not remember, there was a major incident in 2019, a chemical incident at Tottenham Leisure Centre. And one of the things I'm very keen to know is what has been the lessons learned in terms of how we responded to such an incident. So we've had that incident where 4 or 5 people were hospitalised. One of them was a resident of mine in my ward who still speaks about it as having sort of a really long-term impact on her and her experience with sort of leisure services there. But also you now have something like this, which is far more systemic and significant, has far-reaching consequences. It's deprived an entire community of basic leisure amenities. And, you know, on a separate note, I mean, I think the word frustrated, I've personally exhausted the word frustrated. I think it's utterly intolerable, the length of time it's taken. So with that all in mind, there's a few questions I really want to grasp. One of the first questions is, what lessons have we learned from that chemical incident in terms of how we treat the monitoring regime, in terms of how we go into this facility, check that they are doing maintenance, that they are doing their sort of, they're basically, you know, doing what they're meant to be doing, which is make sure that the centre is well run, well maintained, it's been signed off by third-party contractors, and we're not necessarily taking Fusion's word for it, that we're saying Fusion reported back to us that they are doing this maintenance on a periodical basis, and that's sufficient for us. So how proactive were officers from that period to date? Because I do think that was a clear, you know, red flag in my book, that chemical incident, due to how serious it was. And the other question is why the length of time? This has been going on for 3 or 4 months now, and I think people are rightly concerned to draw. I mean, you know that those kind of questions as to the workers in the report you mentioned started on Monday. Why, and I understand that the wet side, where the sort of high voltage side is clearly far more complex, far more expensive, far more extensive work is needed. But if you in your report say that some work can begin to shorten that lead time, why wasn't that started sooner? Because surely if it's a case of we're not dependent on, working out whether this collapsed sewer and the fecal matter is really Thames water, which is what it sounds like to me, rather than it being anyone else, then why can't we just lay the ground until we get to a stage where we then need to do further intense work?
Okay, so I've got a slide on monitoring later. However, what I would say in relation to the chemical incident back in 2019, the pool water treatment advisory group were pulled in to carry out an investigation. There were problems with the pool dosing system, which Fusion addressed, and they put in a number of measures, changed a lot of the procedures, which we and that advisory group were happy with, and were operating to without any further incidents at Tottenham Green. However, I'll come on to the issue at Park Road in a short while in relation to that, because it does have a bearing. However, what we have been doing is actually still monitoring that process to make sure that they have been doing the right thing. But we're very much dependent upon the information that comes through to us from Fusion. But we were relatively comfortable with what was going on at Tottenham Green at that stage in terms of the quality of the work. In terms of the number of weeks taken, part of that was down to trying to get to the bottom of what was going on with the water, the ingress water. So a number of weeks was spent trying to find that out, because what we wanted to do was actually try and do the high voltage and the low voltage at the same time. And part of the process was actually getting UK Power Networks comfortable with the principle of actually getting the power supply back into the building in order to enable us to do the work we're doing at the moment. So obviously water and electricity don't mix particularly well, which is why we want to get the high voltage stuff up on the plinth. But what we've had to do is actually just continue to press on with that pumping out, because we can't find the source of the water. Ideally, we would have found the source of the water, cut that off, and then worked in a dry environment all the way through. But we've just not been able to do that. So we had to satisfy, first of all, UK Power Networks. It was safe to turn the transformer back on again. So they had to do some testing on that. That passed. We were then able to look at, okay, with that scenario in place, with the water still coming in, what is it we can do next? So part of that contractually was down to Fusion to come up with a rectification plan to then enable us to look at the practicality of that, make sure that was available. They then had to go through a procurement process to get a contractor on board. There's a limit of the skills of some of the contractors out there, so they had to go to specialists. So they actually procure those. They then come in as soon as possible, and that's where they were very much dependent upon the availability of the contractors to come in, hence the amount of time that's elapsed before they've actually made a start out on site. So a number of factors behind that.
Yeah, I'll give you. Go ahead.
Thank you for that answer. It's very helpful. I mean, and I take that fully on board, and I really appreciate the sort of detailed answer. I think just to conclude on this last point, I think one of the things that has been fed back to me, and I'm sure to a number of Tottenham councils in particular, is that I think our communication in the early days was very patchy. So I think that level of detail would have been much handier throughout. I understand now there's more or less weekly updates with far more information being shared, which I think is helpful. But I do think the historical issue, which we'll come to, I'm sure, the second part, surrounding the quality of service that Fusion provide and the closure period, those first 2 or 3 months, it was quite lackluster. And I do think there might need to be some sort of reflection on how we go about doing this. And the reason why I started with 2019, it was the exact same thing that happened. I remember that period very well. I was not a councillor, but I do remember it was very vague and woolly. And I think it's kind of repeated itself in the beginning, the response, if I'm to be honest, but it has really picked up quite a lot. And it might be because officers were clearly concerned with just getting stuff done and moving, which I understand, I appreciate, but that Clapham Mound omnibus doesn't. So I would really want to pass that on as feedback.
So in relation to that, Chair, what you may recall is we were putting out occasional updates on what was going on at Tottenham Green, based upon what we were being advised by Fusion at the time in terms of when they felt they could get the centre back open again. But each time we put that out, there were dates being provided that we were then missing. So it got to a point where we lacked the confidence to actually put anything out until we're absolutely sure that what we're putting out was deliverable. So again, I've got some preliminary timescales in terms of dry side might reopen at Tottenham Green, but I don't want to raise expectations at this point in time. What I do know is that they are working on a specific set of repair work to the low voltage system there. I've got a clear idea as to what the timescale, estimated timescale is of that. When we get to the end of that period, and let's hope they can do it quicker than the 31st of March, but I've got no guarantee that's going to be the case. But as soon as that is finished, then we're going to be going in and testing the rest of the equipment at Tottenham Green, getting that resolved as quickly as we possibly can. It may well be that, you know, air handling units, etc., or the heating system all work straight away, but the problem is it's been dormant for a few months, and because of that, there's a degree of uncertainty, because it may well be when we go in there, certain things do not work. We need to actually order up the parts, get those in place before we can actually potentially have a functioning centre. So once we've got that certainty, then we can actually start to put out some more information. But for that period of time, because we had a low level of confidence of what we're being advised, it got to a point where we felt as though we've got to really get on top of this, have a clear idea as to what the rectification plan is, when it's going to start, and then we can actually start putting out some clear messages. Otherwise, I accept that we were not putting out a great deal of information because that was the scarcity of the information and the lack of confidence we had in what we were being told at that time.
Thank you very much. Thanks. Councillor Worrell, before I ask my own questions.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Mark. I don't know if you were going to come onto this later, but I just wondered if you could outline what kind of alternative provision or signposting is being done by for the local residents who are affected by this service being missing. Are people being kind of passed on to any like local voluntary sector services, or do we have any arrangements with leisure facilities and pools in other boroughs? What's being done to kind of replace the important provision that's gone at the moment?
Yes, that was one of the questions that I was going to ask, because Seven Sisters Ward, Northumberland Park, are the residents that use that, and they're one of the most marginalised and most impoverished residents. I have young people who have approached me who have aspirations, dreams and goals. They want to compete in the Olympics. Those are the only resources that they have. So it's far reaching, the impact of not having that facility. And I'm more interested in what brokering deals and partnership deals that you're doing with, say, Islington, or whatever what's happening to make sure that the impact isn't great and far reaching, because an athlete, 3 months in an athlete's life of not training means that they can't compete.
So in response to that, both of my stepdaughters have been competitive swimmers. So one decided to give up completely because of COVID, and the other has kept going, but not to the level as she was at before. My eldest stepdaughter competed in the British Championships a few years ago, so COVID had a knock-on effect. So I understand totally this issue about the accessibility to pools. In terms of, we've obviously got a limited range of options within Haringey, and that's why it's really important we got on top of what was going on at Park Road and made sure that that facility, at the very least, was available in terms of all 4 pools at that location. In terms of signposting, we've been clarifying that Park Road is available. We've been clarifying that New River as a general fitness centre is also available, but also referred residents onto other pools because the likes of Haringey Aquatics, even with Tottenham Green operational, still have to use pools outside of Haringey to train their swimmers. So as it currently stands, we've signposted that part of the weekly briefing that is now coming out from Councillor Williams, signposting in that way, giving as much information we can, trying to make sure that as it comes forward, we've got opportunities for alternative study locations for the Easter holiday if need be. So we're starting to build that picture up in terms of what we can actually share and where we can actually divert people to. But it's a picture that's actually gradually building up.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think is there any kind of resource that's kind of going in, whether that's you know, to cover additional transport people have to do, or kind of compensation and that sort of thing, whether that's covered by the council or covered by Fusion, I don't know, but are we able to kind of offer any actual kind of monetary redress for the, yeah, increased costs and inconvenience and all this?
At the moment, that isn't necessarily available. Part of what we have at present is the problem of who would we claim against, because the whole situation at Tottenham Green is down to the ingress of water, because we don't know where that water is coming from, who has caused the problem at Tottenham Green. It slightly constrains us. You know, we've reverted back to the contract to look at what can we do with Fusion, what can we force them to do, and it's quite limited other than what we're doing at the moment. So there's no opportunity through the contract for them to provide transport for people to go to a different pool. All we can actually do is flag up where those facilities are.
Can I just add to this? The companies that I've seen, even growing up as a child, if the bus breaks down, you get the passengers off the bus and they wait for the next bus to come along, or they get somebody to come in, because it's a company, it's not a standalone service. So I'm struggling to understand why Fusion, you know, they must have a contingency plan that if there is something like this that happens, what do they do to make sure that the passengers get to their destination?
They don't run a bus service to and from Tottenham Green. So
I'm just using that as an analogy. I'm just using that as an analogy.
What Fusion are contracted to do is provide a leisure service at Tottenham Green, at Park Road, at Broadwater Farm. They're not contracted to provide a service outside of the borough, even in terms of transferring them across to an alternative location.
I'll say you used the word confidence in your thing, that the confidence levels, I think the confidence levels in the community are basically zero now. You know, there's a lot of despair and frustration. Can you move on to the next part of the, thank you very much.
Okay, so next slide, please, Philip. That's all right, no problem. Going on to, thank you. So picking up on Councillor's point earlier on in relation to the lack of confidence about Fusion and the incident back in 2019, we became concerned when it was observed that there were issues with the hand dosing Park Road. Despite Fusion putting in arrangements at Tottenham Green Park Road to actually make sure the dosing system was correct and being checked and everything else, we came across the scenario whereby we thought that there was something not quite right in terms of the dosing situation at Park Road, and the automated systems didn't seem to be working properly, so they were hand dosing. Now that fell outside of the processes that had been established back in 2019, and because of that we challenged them on this. And our leisure team went down there, our environmental health team went down there and checked it out, and were very uncomfortable with what they saw, and suggested that given the circumstances that hand dosing was taking place rather than a reliance on automated dosing, that Fusion should close the pools. And initially they said, no, we think we've got a safe system of keeping these pools in operation. We were not comfortable with that, so we said, no, you're not doing that. We're closing the pools. You need to replace the dosing equipment and make sure that that is operational. Once you've done that, then you can reopen the pool. And that was all 4 of them. There were other issues at Park Road as well in terms of the air handling system. So we're able to pull all 4 of those back into place by really forcing them down the route of actually making sure they did what we wanted them to do, really applying the standards we expected of them. So that's where we moved on to. Next slide, please, Philip. So what we said is what we want to do is we want to get those automated dosing controllers, which are the image on the top right. They're the new systems that they acquired and put in. There was a long wait time for them. To be fair to Fusion, they had those on order. They just went up front with us about the fact that they'd actually had a lead-in period for their delivery, but they arrived, and we were not happy with opening any of the pools at Park Road until they arrived. Fortunately, there was only a limited time span between us actually closing the pools down and then being able to get those into place. We wanted the circulation system sorted out for the diving pool, and we wanted a repair in place for the air handling as well. There are a number of remedial works that need to be done around the Lido, so we said, as far as we're concerned, you've got to do all of this before we're happy about opening up this centre. It was kickback from Fusion, who felt as though it was perfectly okay to keep going as was. We said, nope, that's not the case. You have to do all of this, which they did. They then instigated that programme of actions, and they've been continuing with those programmes since. And they completed all the works, as I said on the slide, by the 7th of February. So it was a week or so where the entire centre was shut down. And that was because we were not prepared to actually keep it open under those circumstances. And this was despite the fact that Tottenham Green was closed, but what we wanted to do is actually make sure that Park Road was operating in a totally safe manner and operating as a viable alternative in some respects to the missing facilities at Tottenham Green. The problems at Park Road were significantly less than at Tottenham Green because it wasn't to do with electrical power failure. And if you can possibly just about make out from the photograph on the bottom right that the system actually sits on the plinth there. So even if they had a problem with ingress of water, the same level of issue would not arise at Park Road, which is why it's really important from our perspective to make sure that we go in there and put the stuff on the plinth at Tottenham Green so we never encounter this problem again. But certainly in terms of those facilities, we are monitoring them. And will continue to do so, and that's on a very regular basis. There have been instances where the dosing system since 8th of February have gone out of kilter, and on those circumstances, the various pools have been closed for a short period of time to correct the situation, but making sure that the original arrangements put in place back in 2019 are followed through to the letter. Okay. So I'm happy to move on to sort of some of the other elements because it does play into Park Road and Tottenham Green Chair in terms of the next few slides. But
please go ahead.
Thank you. We have been receiving lots of complaints. Thank you. We've had obviously lots of complaints, lots of members' inquiries about what's been going on across the board in relation to Fusion. But we're really making sure that we're feeding that through to Fusion, who at one point claimed, well, we've hardly had any complaints. So we shared those complaints with them so that the Chief Executive was well aware of the level of anger in the community and also anger from members as well in terms of the way in which it was felt as though they were operating. We had discussions with the Park Road Lido user group. There was a meeting at 5 o'clock this evening, which I wasn't able to get along to. It's a tripartite meeting between ourselves, the user group and Fusion to really make sure that Park Road, not just the Lido, but other elements of that centre are operating in the right way. So we are trying to harden them to account through that. We've met with Haringey Aquatics as well, so we understand the challenges that they face, picking up on the issue about those who wish to compete in the Olympics, etc. But we're really focused in on making sure that there's a clear understanding with Fusion that we don't expect standards to slip and we are on their case. In terms of making sure that things are operating the right way, we've commissioned some mystery shopping, as it says on the slide, by Right Directions, and they're doing some external benchmarking as well. They're doing the health and safety audit, so it's a totally independent thing from what our health and safety officers would do. And that's next Tuesday at Park Road, Wednesday at Broadwater Farm. And when we do get Tottenham Green back in operation, we will actually bring Right Directions back in to actually do a similar testing there. In terms of refunds, that was a really big issue where people were claiming we're not getting our money back. Despite Fusion saying, oh, we'll cancel your direct debit order, we'll give you a refund, everything else. A number of the issues coming through from customers were about refunds. So again, we've been totally on their case, trying to tackle that issue. Next slide, please. But Fusion said, use this email address for any of the refunds. I had a number of people contacting me saying, well, we've never actually had anything through from Fusion. We were sharing that email address for them to actually make sure they knew what's going on. You jumped on too, Philip. So in terms of moving forward, as I said, we've got the ongoing tripartite meeting with the Park Road Loader user group. We're looking to follow up again with Haringey Aquatics, who understood where we were coming from and what we're trying to do. And obviously they came along to full council on the 13th of February as well. We've asked for statutory compliance documents. Fusion have been reminded of that today, that they need to come through. We don't expect there to be any particular issue with that. Barry Francis, Director, is intending to have quarterly meetings out on site with Anthony Corley, the Chief Executive of Fusion, and to go around the centres. I had hoped to get down to Tottenham Green myself to find out what's going on down there, and also get to the Park Road Lighter user group meeting, or the tripartite meeting as myself. But just been too many other things going on today to enable me to do that. But as I said, I have a meeting tomorrow with Fusion to find out where things are at Tottenham Green, but also to follow through with any issues that come out of this evening's meeting from the user group to really push through on that. So we are really putting the pressure on Fusion to make sure that they perform. And then at the moment that's happening at Park Road. We're quite comfortable with that. But certainly in terms of, there have been a couple of instances in the last couple of days coming through in relation to refunds, pushed them. They've got a new manager in place, new business manager, the one that we had beforehand. He's moved to a different part of the organisation. New chap has come in. We've started to work with him to make sure that he fully understands where we're coming from, the level of service we expect from Fusion moving forward. Happy to take questions.
Thank you. Councillor Dunstall.
Thank you. I've got 5. I'm going to rattle them off if that's all right.
Go
rapid fire.
Go fast.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Mark. So, guess the first one is where does contract monitoring sit, and what was in place previously regarding monitoring? I find it a bit odd that we're suggesting we're really tightening up on the monitoring by increasing these to quarterly sessions. That would strike me as a pretty standard thing to do within a kind of commissioning or contracting structure. What guarantees and evidence do we have that this won't go back, won't slip in terms of that monitoring? And what guarantees do we have that it's not just kind of standard monitoring practice across the council? That's question 1. We've taken a lot of action to increase monitoring. That's to be welcomed. What evidence can you provide that we're driving that monitoring? I'm picking up a lot from the conversations previously and from this, that historically we've sort of relied on Fusion to tell us nice stories. So what can you sort of tell me about exactly what that is? I've asked both those questions previously to this scrutiny group and didn't really get satisfactory responses. So happy for a response to come after this, but I would like some sort of detail to that. What exactly does senior management engagement with stakeholders look like? What has happened to date? What's happening going forward? And what is the outcome we want to see from that? Similarly, the leisure user centre panels, thank you. Have these been started, the leisure centre panel groups? If not, when? How frequently will they meet, and what is the aim of them? And lastly, staffing has been highlighted as an issue with Fusion across Fusion sites. I realise that they are not our staff, but I wanted to know what's happened to existing staff from Tottenham Green, and what guarantees do we have that, come reopening, they'll be able to staff Tottenham Green and other sites satisfactorily? And do we have any insight into what causes those staffing issues? Is it that they're not paying people enough? Is it that the work environment's grim? Is it a mixture of both? Yeah, I'll leave it there. Thanks.
That's a lot of questions. Do you think you have the ability to answer all of them, or do you want to
I'll try and answer as many of
while?
those as I possibly can. So in terms of the contract monitoring, there was always contract monitoring in place by the leisure team, but it was, I wouldn't say it's light touch, but it's not as intensive as we are at the moment. So what we've actually done is stepped up the level. So previously, I've never been too involved in looking after what's going on at Park Road. I am now. I've been out to Park Road just to see what's going on, make sure I'm satisfied with what's going on out there. in tandem with that, what they did with the staff was relocated them from Tottenham Green to Park Road, which meant that they had a full complement of staff and able to run that facility properly. But what they're also doing with some of their staff was actually using the opportunity whilst the centre was closed to really focus in on bringing the place up to scratch, because it looked pretty tatty at times. So an awful lot of work has gone into really cleaning it up. There are still a number of issues still to be addressed down there. We are on their case, asking when you're going to complete these works. We have been gathering our evidence of our own. We've been asking for test results. So, for example, in terms of the automated dosing equipment, we want calibration results to demonstrate that it's within parameters. There's an awful lot of activity going on that. So that's where that's been going on. In terms of the engagement, the LIDO user group, it's not just something that suddenly happened. It's been in place for quite some time, this tripartite meeting. But I think where the user group were frustrated beforehand, it was because there wasn't a great deal of reaction from Fusion. So they were asking for lots of things at different times. And what's happened more recently is since we've intervened and stepped in relation to the dosing side of things at Park Road, well, that has picked up, and the chair from the user group was disappointed I couldn't make today's meeting because of the amount of extra effort we are putting into ensuring that Fusion are delivering. So that's covered some of the issues. We do know that in terms of when Tottenham Green opens again, there's likely to be an issue with the level of resources, but because they're not having to operate the pools at the start, because we'll be opening up the gym only, that's unlikely to be an issue initially. But we are conscious that because of COVID, the number of staff that Fusion employed has reduced quite a lot. And our estimate is that there are too few people to really run Tottenham Green and Park Road properly. So it is an area of concern. So part of the rectification plan, if you like, for the high voltage and getting the pools back into play will be, okay, what are you going to be doing in relation to your resourcing? And that's going to be part of that challenge moving forward.
Thank you, Councillor Worrell. Can you keep it a bit quick because we've got a packed agenda?
Yeah, sure.
And afterwards, Ibrahim, sorry.
It's okay. So I first just wanted to make the point that aside from kind of aspiring athletes, and even aside from just generally needing people to have their physical activity levels, you know, for general health, there's an LGA statistic, which is that leisure facilities deliver 66% of NHS cancer rehab services and 79% of social prescribing initiatives. So I don't know what the picture is in Haringey in terms of how that's affecting health services, but I wondered if you had a sense of whether that was a problem, whether we'd kind of been in discussion with local health providers on that. The other question I quickly wanted to make was, in the budget on Wednesday, the Chancellor announced this 63 million swimming pool support fund, and I wondered if that is something we're going to be looking to make use of for sort of refurb and making either of the two centres more sustainable for the future. Thank you.
So in relation to your first question, I'll actually have to ask some of my officers to assist with giving that answer, because I don't know the extent to which we're playing into that, but that's certainly something we can answer in writing. In relation to the 63 million, that was really good news. Because that was obviously looking to address the increase in energy costs that are associated with running the leisure centres. At the moment, it's not really too much of an issue for us here, because Fusion have a contract in place for their energy supply that holds them to pre-existing contract prices through to the end of October. So there's not a great deal of urgency for us to lay claim to that funding. However, what I'd want to make sure of is that if that funding is for the 23-24 financial year, and there is an impact that's going to come over the horizon in October when the contract is renegotiated by Fusion, then there might be some additional energy costs that we could use part of that £63 million to offset.
Just quickly, my understanding is that part of it is for energy costs, but part of it is also for kind of longer term upgrades of estates, which might be more relevant to us.
Yeah, and that side of things we will be looking at, because we know there is a bit of a backlog of maintenance work at all three facilities, in fact. So we'd want to actually pick that up and address that as well.
Councillor Ali.
Thank you, Chair. Very quickly, just two brief points. What conversations have you had with Enfield. I understand that there are similar problems in Enfield, and I do appreciate a different context because Fusion, like Haringey, don't run every single site, but there are a number of challenges. And the reason why I mentioned Enfield as an example, if you look at their recruitment website, just before this incident happened, they were recruiting for managers that would manage cross-borough. So clearly they have some sort of operational model where they draw managers from one part of, from Southbury or Albany, and then bring them to Tottenham and then move them around. So there's no real consistency or level of service. So that's one thing I'd be interested to see what conversation you've had in terms of a way forward, because my real concern is that I think most residents are quite cognizant that this is a long time coming. You know, the lists have been faulty in Tottenham for a long time. I've personally been banging on about the fact that they refused for several years to buy a cleaning machine to clean the dry side. Something very basic as that. It became, like a Rubik's Cube, trying to sort of really get them to commit to that. But I think that's my concern, is that they have their employment model is very, very opaque. And it might be the case that it gives them flexibility as an employer to say, we just move the resources based on demand. But if that's not good for Haringey, what clay can we claim, and can we collaborate with Enfield officers? Are we talking to Enfield officers about shared challenges? I know things are not hunky-dory in Enfield as well.
We are discussing with Enfield officers, our equivalents over there, how they're managing the situation with Fusion. We know that they do have problems with Fusion as well, but we are looking at how we can actually jointly tackle those issues. We do know that some of Fusion's resources are shared amongst a number of boroughs, so that the business manager that was looking after Haringey was also looking after a number of other locations, but obviously because of what happened at Tottenham Green and also then at Park Road, he was spending the bulk of his time over here. He's moved on to a different part of Fusion. We've got a new manager who's come in, but he's got quite a wide portfolio. We want to make sure that there is a great deal of focus on Haringey to make sure that as we move into remobilisation of the Tottenham Green Leisure Centre, he's actually given that a due consideration. As far as I'm aware, he was going to be at the Lido user group meeting tonight, so engagement I think is going to pick up. But we do know that there have been a number of changes within Fusion in the last couple of years. They changed their chief executive about a year or so ago. Different person at the top, looking at a different model. But what we want to make sure of is that we've actually got these leisure centres properly resourced. And that's what we're looking at. And we'll actually look at Enfield in terms of how they're addressing that particular issue as well as some of the contract issues as well.
One quick comeback.
Thank you, Chair. Very briefly, are you confident that your team have got the resources they need to do whatever it takes to get this sorted, whether it mean, and looking at all the options, every single option on the table?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
That is the quickest answer for the day. Okay, I'm going to change up the order a little bit, because I would want Councillor Chandwani to speak at the end, because I think it's more of a viable way forward, and it was highlighted to me from herself as well. So can I please bring Beth in with your report, please? That's number 9. That's waste recycling and street cleansing performance. That's another hot potato.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So I'm sure most people are familiar with the contractor, but we have Veolia, and I'm going to start with the cleansing first of all. So Veolia are our contractor for an integrated waste and cleansing contract. We are 2 years from the end of that contract. It was a 14-year contract. We deliver our services also in accordance with the Cleaner Haringey strategy, which has 4 main priorities. I actually did an audit of the strategy a couple of weeks ago, and we have either delivered or are on target to deliver all of the actions in there. We're also in accordance with the current Labour manifesto and also the corporate delivery plan, which has a number of items and actions in relation to waste and recycling. I just want to highlight the fact that we're in the middle of a very large programme, which is looking at the current integrated contract and our services that sit within that, and looking at how we can future-proof services moving forward from the contract expiry date. So this report is really just a high-level update in view of that huge piece of work that we are doing at the moment. So if I move on to the performance of the cleansing, we measure this through 2 strategic performance indicators within the contract, which is NI 195 performance and resident satisfaction. I think I've explained before, but just again, sorry, the NI 195 performance is made up of 4 parameters: litter, detritus, graffiti and fly posting. There's also 39 contract operational targets, which we also use to measure the contractor's performance. So going on to the main one in terms of the level of cleanliness, again, just to remind those that might not know, that the lower the score, the better the cleanliness effectively. So if we go to table 1, street cleansing NI 195 results, just to say this is the year to date, because we do 4, they're called tranches, periods if you like, of monitoring, which mirror the quarters broken up in the year. So as you can see, the litter is 5.1, the detritus is 2.8, the graffiti is 2.4, and the fly posting is 0.7. So the graffiti and the fly posting have got a very small increase, but it's still an improvement on the year before. The litter has shown an improvement from the year before, as has the detritus. If you look at figure 1, it sets out each of those 4 elements, which you can also see compared to previous years. Table 2 just clarifies all of the results there in each of the tranches. So in conclusion of the NI 195 results, we've seen a positive improvement. This is despite a number of challenges, I suppose, that we've faced. As everyone probably knows, we've had extreme weather recently, which hasn't helped the cleansing team being able to do their job. The waste team also underwent a restructure, which meant that we had vacant posts on the monitoring for a short time. However, we still managed to do significant monitoring, and the results speak for themselves. In terms of the resident satisfaction, we still are overachieving against the contract target of 67% versus 62%. We've just undertaken the 22-23 survey, but haven't got the results for that yet. Just a few improvements to note really here. We undertook some changes to the way that the resources were used. So we implemented more barrow beats, effectively, or the sweepers that you see on the high streets, as opposed to mobile teams, because the mobile teams were often stuck in traffic or were on top of each other, so couldn't necessarily do the work as efficiently as a person with a barrow. In terms of other work that we've been doing, we've done, I don't know if anyone's noticed, but we got some external funding to undertake some pavement washing along the entire Wood Green High Street on both sides, also to remove some chewing gum. So we got some funding for that. Also, the Business Improvement District gave us some funding towards that. We are shortly about to undertake a litter bin audit. It's actually a bin audit of all the bins in the entire borough, including all estates, all litter bins, that will help us have a strategic direction moving forward. We're also undertaking some trials on some cleansing equipment. This was as part of the MTFS cleansing saving. We've trialled about 3 or 4 pieces of kit, and we're about to make a decision on what that will look like. We've done some updates in information technology. I won't go through them all, but essentially Veolia's software Echo has been rebuilt, so that will deliver more accurate and improved information. We've also done some changes to Love Clean Streets, which is another reporting tool for residents, which will also enable better reporting and monitoring. So I'm going to move on to the waste. So the waste and recycling, again, is measured contractually through strategic performance indicators. We have 3: recycling rate, missed collections per 100,000, and resident satisfaction. There's also 12 operational targets that we monitor. Because the recycling rate is an annual target, I'm just going to recap on the year to date that I have. which was 30.4 for 2021-22. Some of the reasons or an explanation, which was also covered in the last report, are detailed here in terms of the discussion on why the recycling rate has dropped in years. One of the biggest contributors to that is a downturn in our tonnage contribution from NLWA, and that's essentially made up from Western Road RRC and also the wood tonnages. Basically, the wood market is challenging in terms of the wood types that you get. Here, it's often treated wood or wood that cannot be recycled easily. So a higher proportion than previously has had to go to biomass, which has had an impact on our recycling rate. We've also got reject or contamination rate, slight increase from the MRF that we use. We are trying to address that in terms of a number of communication activities. And as I say, we're currently looking at the services as a whole, which includes communications and outreach to understand how we can deliver that service better. One of the requirements that we have is the waste reduction and recycling plan, which is a requirement under the Mayor of London as part of the environment strategy. Again, because we're doing all of this modelling and data analysis, it makes sense to update that at the same time that we'll be updating our strategy in the summer this year. So the report just goes through what that looks like, and in Appendix 1, I've just provided an update on the actions that we have within our current RRP in terms of also some updates on those actions. And that's my report finished.
Thank you very much, Beth. Any questions? Okay then, Ian, your hand was up first, and then Councillor Dunstall. I have a question. Ibrahim, do you have one? Councillor Worrell? Okay, so we all have questions. So first of all, Ian, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Two questions just quickly on the basis on figures in the report. On page 13, the NI 195 results. I'm just wondering why there isn't any sort of aspiration or ambition to actually improve targets over the years. If you look at the figures for all of the litter, detritus, etc., the targets have been the same since 2016. And I would have thought that there should be some aspiration or ambition to actually have tougher targets over the, I mean, that's 6-7 year period in which the targets haven't altered. So that's the first question. The second question, on page 20, you've got at the top of the page, table 4, the recycling rate for the last available year, 2021-2, says 30.4%. And in the table below, where it's compared with other boroughs, you've got 31.2 for what appears to be the same year. So I don't know if I'm misreading that, but it does look as though there's a serious contradiction in the figure for the same year. So I welcome a response to that. And then outside the papers, 2 quick questions about contractual arrangements. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, that there is a contractual arrangement for bags that have been swept up by road sweepers to be collected at the end of the day. In fact, in the past, I don't know if it's still the case, there used to be a fine if they weren't collected at the end of the day. But increasingly, I'm getting comments from residents saying that the bags are left at the end of the day. They get ripped open at night by foxes and whatever, messes everywhere. And then when they are eventually collected, yeah, the bag is picked up by the lorry, but the road isn't swept. So you've got all the mess that's been there from the ripped open bag. So is there a contractual arrangement? If not, shouldn't there be? And if there is it being monitored, and is there a fine? And secondly, am I right in thinking there's a contractual responsibility to return wheelie bins on collection days to where they were left at the front of the property, or the curtilage, whatever you want to call it, rather than on the pavement or in somebody else's address, or worse still, just blocking the gate, so that if you're out for the day, it's an open invitation for anybody to know that you're not at home? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do you think you can answer those? Do you want another set? Okay.
Yeah,
so please answer them, and then I will go on to the next councillor. And I'll leave myself to last.
So firstly, the targets for the contract. So those were the targets that were set at the beginning of the contract. I agree that we would want to see year-on-year improvement, ideally. I guess if you look at the achievement, though, it does show a year-on-year improvement. So Veolia essentially have worked with us to set their own target, but the contractual targets are the ones that remain static. But yes, I do agree with that. In relation to the contradiction, I apologise, that is a typo. That should not say 31.2. That was the year-to-date statistic, and the final outturn is 30.4.
So the second table.
The second table, that was at the time of year-to-date, and that's a typo. It should have been updated to say 30.4, but 30.4 is the correct amount. The next one, in terms of bags left on the road, yes, there is a target, there's a financial penalty, firstly, for failure to clear them within a given time period. Perhaps if you could let me know the locations, we do monitor it, but it would be helpful to know where those locations are so we can specifically monitor those hotspots and report back. We do a response form, and yes, there's a financial deduction. And the same applies to the wheelie bins on collection day. We do know that this is an issue. There's a number of factors. Sometimes the bin can't be put back. Sometimes residents actually leave the bin out thinking that it's helpful for Veolia. And yes, I fully admit that sometimes Veolia don't always put it back. So we do quite a lot of monitoring on this issue in particular, because I know it's something that residents don't like, and understandably. Again, if you could perhaps give me some, I already have some locations from you, but any others that you might know. We are looking at various systems and improvements to that, starting, well, firstly, we do it all the time, but for a slightly longer term, we are looking, as I said, about doing the bin audit. So we know every single property in the borough, what space they have, what bins they have, and then what bins should and shouldn't be in that household area. And then we know if we can perhaps do a permit system to see for those that have no space at all, whether it is appropriate, if it's not causing an obstruction, for a bin to be placed on the pavement. So that's all work that we'll be developing. Hope that helps.
Thank you. I'm just going to go along because I can't remember who put their hand up.
Chair, I might be a little bit confused, but I thought you were going to take all the reports and then do the questions. Just because I don't know if I should be answering because it's my Q&A.
You will answer in time. Yeah.
Okay.
Do you want to come in?
If there's going to be any questions left for me to answer.
That's what I was thinking. There will be.
What happens is all the reports come.
Yeah.
And then so everyone knows the context of my whole portfolio, and then I get to answer any questions in them.
I think that you can answer them. What would people prefer? I thought that we could I just wanted it a bit more interactive, because sometimes when we leave it right to the end, you lose your trail of thought.
I'm just letting you know that at the moment I'm sitting here in my Q&A not answering any questions.
We have questions for you.
Okay.
Okay. But because the next report is fly tipping and Brian isn't here yet.
You can move on to the highways one because Mark is there.
Okay, yeah, can we have highways then, please? Are you able to do that? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll work on the basis that everyone's actually seen the report, because unlike the two presentations, you've had those for a little while. And my apologies for the presentations coming in late. Just trying to finish those off this morning. In relation to the highways report, though, this is an abbreviated report in terms of overall, because we will be taking the highways and street lighting investment plan report to Cabinet in April, which will set out what our plans are for the forthcoming year in terms of the different types of work we'll be doing, how much is being spent and everything else. So as a way of introduction, all I will say is that what people fail to recognise is for every local authority, their highways infrastructure basically is their biggest and most valued asset. And in Haringey, it's worth about £1 billion, and that cost comes from the cost to replace everything out there that you got in terms of your roads, your lighting, your drainage, bridges, etc. And in terms of the report, you've got some details in there in terms of the extent of the assets. There's quite a few of those. What has been, I think, really helpful is in the last few years, there's been additional investment going into highways infrastructure maintenance, both on the highway side and the street lighting side, to make sure that we've actually got a better highways infrastructure for people to use out there, but it's still a long way short of where it needs to be. That said, it's arguably not a lot different from many other local authorities across the country, where there's a backlog of repairs. The Asphalt Industry Alliance said that from their perspective, the backlog in their report last year was about £12 billion. It's significant across the country. And in terms of a state of our network, we've flagged up that we've got 53% of the footway network in need of repair, and 37% of the carriageway network in need of repair. So that the money that we've secured for 23-24 is really important for us to continue the maintenance regime that we have in place. We tried to take a balanced approach between resurfacing, reconstruction and patch repairs, be it on footway and on carriageway. There's been an awful lot of investment in recent years in our street lighting, converting all the lighting to LEDs, introducing a central management system so that we can control it and respond better to when there is faulty lighting. We do have a bit of an issue at the moment with some of our lights where they've got day burners, where there's a bit of an issue with the components that we've fitted, but we've actually gone back to the manufacturer to try and address that. But overall, there's nothing particular I wanted to pick out from the report, but I'm happy to take any questions. But obviously, in terms of our delivery of our highways and street lighting works, all has a positive impact upon the ability for everybody to get around Haringey. And for that reason, it's actually part of the corporate delivery plan that we're delivering our programme for the forthcoming year, as well as completing the programme we've had for 22-23, part of what we're trying to achieve overall. Thank you, Chair.
Can you then go on to, because you're delivering? Yes, yeah. I was going to say, seeing as you've been so concise, thank you for that. Can you move on to the update on parking management and IT systems? Because that's another verbal update that you have, and hopefully Brian will be here then.
Sorry, Chair, with just a question, and I'm happy to be, shot down, because there are 4 reports. I know that is the norm, but my worry is that I'll have questions on more or less each report.
That's the purpose. Can you write them down?
Yeah, I can write them down, but as long as you're happy with that.
Yes, I was going to do it interactive, but the standard, I'm not going against standard. The standard is that all the reports will come in first,
Okay,
and
fine.
then, because I have been making my own notes, and then we will give you all the questions. I'm hoping that Brian does turn up, and I don't know if anybody, he'll be here. Okay, so please go ahead, Mark. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. There are quite a few slides in this pack, but a lot of this is for background purposes only, because a lot of the initial slides actually have been presented to this panel beforehand, but I do appreciate that composition of the panel has changed since the last time I gave a presentation on this. So if you move into the next slide, please. So we had an old parking management system that, in our view, wasn't fit for purpose. We wanted to move to a totally different framework. Civica, the original provider, weren't able to deliver, from what we could tell, what we were looking for, which was a much more flexible, agile system. So the view was that there was nothing we could really do with the Civica system, so we needed something else. So next slide, please. So we went through a process of looking at the potential of creating a virtual parking permit system. And through that process, we identified Taranto Systems Limited were the contractor we wanted to run with. We have a 10-year contract in place. There's an option there also to extend for a further 5 years. Taranto actually provide a similar service to a number of boroughs. But what we were looking for from this contract was an awful lot more than a bog standard parking IT system. Next slide, please. We were really looking for a mechanism whereby people could easily get information, easily get hold of their parking permits, be it residential or visitors. We wanted to make sure that there was an opportunity for blue badge holders not to have to display their blue badge because of the level of theft, the amount of damage being caused to people's cars, the arduous process of getting a replacement blue badge. So moving to the system was really quite important. Next slide, please, Philip. But the system itself is really quite complicated in terms of it sits amongst a number of other different systems. As you can see from this slide, it looks like a bit like a wiring diagram for a car, but it's not. This has the Taranto system sitting at the core of that diagram. 16 different systems operating it, all of which have to operate properly, and you change one bit, it needs to sort of continue to operate properly with all the others. So 10 different subcontractors, 27 different modules developed to actually make sure we're delivering the right system overall. And we've worked collectively across the organisation to actually deliver this. Next slide, please, Philip. So we recognised about a year ago when I last came along to the panel that there were some issues. Councillor Chamberlain and I were quite upfront about that. We recognised it wasn't performing as well as everybody wanted it to. There are glitches. So we identified that what we needed was something called a permit improvement review, where we talked to everybody to really get a real understanding of where the system was not performing as it should do. So a very extensive piece of work, making sure we really understood it. And go to the next slide, please, Philip. Lots of different components to it, which I'm not going to go through each of the boxes in that for the sake of simplicity, but a huge amount of work going into really identifying where there were issues that customers were really struggling with the system overall. Next slide, please. So we've certainly moved the system on from where we were a year ago, and I thought it'd be useful for you to get some feel for what we're dealing with overall. So in terms of resident permits, over 45,000 of those issued through the Taranto system, including the ones for events. 16,000 other types of permits, but looking at a number, almost 1 million virtual visitor permits issued in sort of an 18-month period. But equally, what we recognised was that not everybody has the computer skills to actually get this stuff online. So we always recognised there was also a need for a paper-based approach. Certainly for those people who aren't IT savvy, people who just don't even have a computer or any other sort of means of communication. Also for those for whom English would not be the sort of first language. So, happen to take all that into account. Therefore, working with customer services to make sure we get a really good delivery of service overall. So, but through this process, also 500,000 penalty charge notices issued through the system. The civil enforcement officers have handhelds, able to pull up all the information on those handhelds. A few glitches in the early stages, but overall working well from our perspective. So I'm going to skip through the next 3 slides quite quickly. So you've got some data there in terms of showing you the different types of permits that we actually have. The big blue one is really the sort of resident permits, but there are different types on that one. Next slide, please, Philip. And here you've got an indication that the resident permits are actually quite low in number compared to the number of visitor permits we have to issue each month. And it's the visitor permits which is the bulk of the activity, and where we were really struggling, it has to be said, in terms of trying to cope with the demand and a new system, people struggling with the IT and everything else. A real step up in terms of numbers, starting to plateau in terms of how many we're processing each month now. Next slide, please. And here you've got the split between the number of virtual permits for visitor permits and the number of paper ones. So the paper ones you can get in books of 10, but the ratio here of virtual to paper is about 4 to 1. So 80% of what we're doing transactionally is online, which is what the aspiration really was of the original system. And provided people are able to demonstrate what they've got in the way of permission to actually have visitor permits, it works pretty well. Next slide, please. However, despite all of that, there's still an issue in terms of the system itself, which we think we can still take some improvements forward from. So the permit improvement review flagged up a number of issues that we still couldn't necessarily address through enhancements to the existing system. We felt as though we needed to take that through in a more constructive way. In the meantime, Taranto were working at putting together an online permit module, which is what OPM stands for, a refresh of this. Because the system as it was, and it still is at the moment, is not mobile responsive. So anyone wants to get a parking permit, really difficult to do unless you're using Ringo or whatever to actually pay for your pay-as-you-go permit, your pay-as-you-go parking rather. Very difficult. We want to make sure that happened. So they're doing that. They're actually making sure that it's government design standard compliant, making sure that it's accessible. So we've been working with Taranto to make sure that we've actually got a new system that can come into play, and the sort of profile there in terms of the timing means that later on this year we'll be able to do that. Part of the problem that customers still have is a difficulty in logging onto their account, remember what their login details are, etc., etc. So for example, the online permit module means that now all you do is tap in your email address. It should take you to your records, and you should be able to look at your back history as well as what you're trying to book as well. So we've had some demonstrations of what it looks like, but we're moving towards that. The idea is that they've developed this. We're looking to start running this through on our test system. We're looking to do that early in the new year, and just make sure that this is robust, because when we introduced the original Taranto system, huge impact. Everyone had a lot to get used to. Here we've got a new system that sort of almost a next phase of the Taranto system. It's going to take some people get a bit of getting used to. What we don't want to do is introduce something that has glitches in it. So we want to make sure there's some really robust testing of this. With Taranto taking their time to actually make sure it works from their perspective across a whole range of issues, and some of the bespoking that we were looking for, we want to make sure that through our own rigorous testing process, we get to the end of this and we go live on the new system towards the end of June. Some good news, I think, in terms of the new system. I said the issue about blue badge theft was quite important for us in terms of making sure that we can actually track that down. This shows a couple of charts over the sort of last 6 months, indicating the extent to which the number of blue badges has been stolen, driven down, the number of penalty charge notices we're issuing for stolen badges and misuse also going down, because we're finding greater levels of compliance. And when we don't find compliance, we'll tow away a vehicle that's parked improperly in a disabled parking bay. But the big number here is the fact that we've actually managed to drive blue badge theft down by 65%. And Councillor Chamwani was on the Rip Off Britain programme explaining what we've done, the fact that this is actually quite pioneering, and others need to actually understand what it is we've done. And so we're also thinking about, okay, well, what about visitors to Haringey who are blue badge owners? Is there something that we can do to accommodate them as well? Next slide, please. So I'm going to run through a couple of stuff from the customer services side of things. Next slide, please, Philip, to sort of indicate what's going on, because they were really up against it in customer services, having to deal with loads of customer inquiries. We had some real challenges in terms of the level of demand, both in terms of calls, but also face-to-face as well. But from a customer services perspective, what they're feeding back to us, and they're part of the Strategic Parking Board, which manages the overall IT system, they're starting to see some real steady progress now, able to deal with the level of demand, able to respond to people within a reasonable period of time if they ring up. We had horror stories of people staying on the phone rather, for an hour or more waiting to get through. That's no longer the case. So a really good position. Next slide, please, Philip. And that's certainly the case in terms of the call handling on this one, where it's starting to get back to where we'd expect. Some real heavy peaks in terms of the amount of time that people actually have to wait for calls getting through, but also the volume of calls has fallen as well. Really important. Next slide, please. And customer services have actually upskilled in terms of their ability to process and utilise the Taranto system to actually get a quicker delivery of permits to people as well. So again, even though the numbers are still quite high in terms of the overall situation, they're able to handle it far more effectively than they were beforehand. Next slide, please. So, can I move on? Lovely. So I've done it for you, Philip. That's all right. So from a customer services perspective, and these are the things that they've come up with in terms of where they feel that they are. They've got a good range of frequently asked questions and material they can actually fall back on if they get any queries from any member of the public. They've got a good range of staff that have got a range of skills that can actually shift about to handle a call, deal with the actual issue of a permit. Where there have been system problems in terms of what we've actually got in the system, whilst we await the new OPM, they're actually built in workarounds, working really effectively. They've been working very closely with our own staff in parking services to make sure that the system is seamless almost. In terms of the initial stages of providing the paper permits, there was a real problem in terms of how they were being generated. That's a lot slicker now. They're never in a situation where they're sort of running out of permits. And those permits, the paper permits, also have to go through the Taranto system as well. So everything is going through one source, and we're really controlling it the right way. Yeah, they've now got, as it says here, a motivated, supportive and knowledgeable team. So they're really delivering on the service that we'd like. And as a consequence of that, their turnover is low, really positive, and they feel as though they're really high performing. There we go.
Thank you very much. Number 10. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming, Brian. I shifted the time around, so please don't be thrown by that. I'm waiting for your verbal update on fly tipping. Thank you very much.
Good evening, everybody. For those who don't know me, I'm Brian Illick. I'm sure I've exchanged emails with a few of you around the table, but maybe this is the first time we may have met face to face. So I'm Brian Illick. I'm the head of antisocial behaviour and enforcement. And today I just want to give you an update on our fly tipping strategy and what we've been doing since the service restructured in April. So as mentioned, just to give you a bit of context, our service was working generically up until April 2022, meaning we had an enforcement service that carried out a variety of functions through one dedicated team. We restructured, and in April we separated the service so that we had a dedicated waste enforcement team as opposed to a generic team that covered antisocial behaviour, noise, nuisance, licensing enforcement. And the idea around that is to have a greater focus on some of the issues that are contributing to fly tipping and irresponsible waste disposal. So our main aim in with regards to how we approach enforcement is all around education, communication and intervention. So the enforcement service works closely with partners such as Veolia, Waste Management, Police, private sector housing, environmental health, parks, to try and understand all of the factors that contribute to fly tipping and why residents and businesses dispose of waste irresponsibly. And our primary goal is to reduce the amount of fly tips that is deposited on the street and collected, but also equally is encourage behavioural change. So since we've been restructured into the new service in April, I mean, it usually takes a good 3-4 months to bed in the service, to recruit, to train. And what we've been doing in that time, we've been using the data analysis from Veolia to target our enforcement operations. So what does that mean? That means that rather than willy-nilly going up and down the street trying to identify fly tips. We're using the intel from the local community. We're using the intel that comes from areas like Love Clean Streets, reports made to Veolia, or reports that Veolia have a fly tipping that Veolia have collected proactively. And we use that to focus our enforcement activity. As I mentioned, primarily we're about education, behavioural change, working with businesses, working with residents to try and encourage them to act responsibly, to recycle, and to not dispose of waste in unlawfully. The team use a variety of methods. As I said, we use the education and advice approach. We use fixed penalty notices, we use formal notices, and we also work closely with our colleagues in private sector housing, particularly around landlords and their tenants, around how they're disposing of the waste and how they're containing the waste. We know that the majority of our reports that we receive is around household waste that's disposed of irresponsibly. Yeah, whether that's fly tipping on the street at hot spots, or whether that's not recycling properly, bins overflowing, or landlords not providing their tenants with the information they need in order for them to dispose of their waste responsibly. So a large degree of our work is centered around household waste. It's centered around working with local community, working with private sector housing to identify those landlords and those properties that are either generating in excess of the waste they should, and don't have either the means to dispose of it properly, or who are just unaware what they should be doing with their waste. One of the key things we've been doing has been using our enforcement tools as called fixed penalty notices. So we have a combination of powers around fixed penalty notices. So there's fly tipping fixed penalty notices, there's littering fixed penalty notices, and there's notices that can compel people, individuals, to put certain things in place to ensure that waste is stored and disposed of correctly. To date, since the service restructured in April, we've taken over 1,400, sorry, just under 1,400 enforcement actions centered around fixed penalty notices, primarily fly tipping. I think of all the fixed penalty notices we issue, roughly about 20% of the fixed penalty notices are for fly tipping offences. Of those fly tipping offences, roughly around 16% of those fixed penalties are for household waste. So, and because of the way, because of the enforcement tools and the different types of legislation that's available to us, we can draw on a variety of methods to tackle irresponsible waste disposal and fly tipping. So it might not always be fixed penalties. It may be an enforcement notice that compels them to do something, and if they don't do it, then we can put further sanctions in place. But what we tend to focus on in terms of the service strategy is taking a zero tolerance approach to areas where we see constant fly tipping, and that is around, as I said, issuing fixed penalty notices. So just to give you a little bit of an idea of some of the things we've been doing more recently. So we've issued over 50 informal notices on landlords, and what these notices do, they require landlords to put measures in place to ensure their tenants have all the information they need and understand what to do with their waste. As mentioned, we've issued over just under 1,400 fixed penalty notices for fly tipping and a variety of waste-related offences. We're in the middle of, well, halfway through a CCTV upgrade, whereby we're refreshing all of our on-street community safety CCTV cameras, and part of that work, we've also have at our disposal around 40 odd redeployable cameras. What these cameras do is they can be moved about from location to location, and they can be placed in hotspots where fly tipping occurs, and they can be used to support our enforcement work and gather evidence, not just evidence so we can take enforcement action, but also so that we can assess the behaviours of what residents and landlords are doing, which can then support our intervention work. We have a dedicated web page on the website called The Wall of Shame, where we use some of those video footage of residents fly tipping to, one, ask residents for their help to identify those who are dumping rubbish, but also highlight what we're doing to address the issue of fly tipping. I said that one of the key, and there's one of the other things we have as well is we introduced is black boxes that are on the street for flats above shops to support the responsible disposal of waste for flats that are on time collection streets. Beth might be able to come in here. I think we've put in place about 170 boxes.
Yeah, 171 across 24 time collection zones, and the next stage is Tottenham High Road, and that should be rolled out by May.
So what that does, what the black boxes does, it enables residents who don't have a front garden, have access to a bin, to be able to store their waste safely prior to collection and not have it sitting in the street open to foxes and birds. So that in itself assists us with our enforcement, because we're able to better monitor and manage how waste is, how we approach enforcement for timed collection roads. One of the things that in February last year that was a bit of a challenge was a ruling that we were unable to take fly tipping enforcement action for waste that was presented incorrectly on time collection roads. Didn't mean we couldn't take enforcement action, it just meant we couldn't take a certain type of enforcement action. So that had a bit of a hindrance to how we approach enforcement, but it just meant we had to review what we did and look at another set of armoury and set of tools in our armoury to tackle fly tipping. So another area of work where we see a lot of unlawful activities, commercial waste. So so businesses by law, they have to have in place legal arrangements to dispose of their waste, unlike households whose waste collection is covered through their council tax. Businesses don't have that same luxury, so to speak. So they have to have arrangements in place with a private contractor or the council to dispose of their waste. And we've found that on some of our time collection roads, there are some businesses who do disguise their waste in black bags to look like domestic waste. So we are doing a lot of work in our high roads to tackle that type of illegal activity. Again, it's a combination of education and advice, but also serving formal notices on the businesses, asking them to produce and evidence how they dispose of their waste, and where they're unable to do that, they can receive a fixed penalty. And at least just under 10% of our work evolves around commercial waste, and we understand that it's important to deal with the business commercial waste, because some of those businesses are adjacent to residential areas, which also sees fly tipping and dumped waste in areas where we think it's household, but it's actually commercial waste. So just to add another area of work, we are currently in the process of pursuing or finalising is prosecution. So a lot of the fixed penalties that are not paid, the next step for them is to prosecute. So effectively, when we issue a fixed penalty, it is effectively an option to not go to court. If you pay the fixed penalty, you will not go to court. So at the moment, the courts have quite a degree of a backlog. Since COVID, the courts have been really delayed in taking on additional prosecutions. So we are currently working with the courts to get a date where we can take a number of these fixed penalties, these unpaid fixed penalties each month to the courts to have them prosecuted in bulk. So that's one of the things we're currently involved in now with the courts and our legal department.
I'm going to have to speed you up a bit.
Oh, I'm sorry. So I can summarise. So
yes, please.
So in summary, since we restructured in April, our main focus has been around education and advice, working in partnership, intervention, zero tolerance to fly tipping, particularly in areas where there are recurring fly tips. We're using the data from our colleagues in Veolia, and we're working closely with residents to identify recurring themes around fly tipping and hotspots, and using action plans and fixed penalties to tackle them, as well as working with, as I said, private sector housing team, where we understand that the majority of the household waste offences emanate from.
Thank you very much. We did get this report very late, and I'm going to ask you to please bring it to the next committee, because it didn't give us time to actually look over it so that we could actually properly scrutinize it. So we appreciate you coming here to give us a verbal handover, but this is just the headlines and we need to have the details to be able to churn over it. So I'd appreciate that. I might not be the chair the next time, who knows? That's all up for the grabs, but yeah. So we have got 45 minutes for questions. So we're going to have to be quick. Councillor Dunstall, I think everybody's got questions. So I'm just going to go around the table this way, please. And I've even got my own, but I'll wait till last. So go ahead, Councillor Dunstall.
Thank you. Firstly, the parking thing, just a comment really. When we, after the election in May, this was like a hot topic and people were having an absolute shocker, and it wasn't dealt with brilliantly. I think the comms maybe wasn't great. I don't know. But what I would say is that it seems like this is, pretty much a success story. There's more work to be done. I was trying to get visitor things over the weekend. It was a bit clunky, but it does seem like the system is embedded and people are kind of used to the changes. So I think that, credit where it's due. On the waste stuff, do we have any initial or early feedback on the waste management survey? What is the next step with that? And can we get some, or is there an intention to get some comms out to people? A lot of the feedback I've picked up from residents is that periodically we do these things and then we don't tell them what we're doing, the information, and it all gets a bit lost. So even if the update is just like, thank you very much, there'll be a further update in spring or whatever. I suppose we're in spring, aren't we? On the fly tipping stuff, do we have a feel for, I think you mentioned this actually, Brian, sorry, but the split between kind of out of borough commercial fly tipping versus people coming out of their properties and, dumping bulky waste, and how easy is it, how many of those kind of PCNs or penalty notices, I guess, are for for that proportion that are kind of, you know, out of borough people just driving in to dump stuff and drive out again. Is there any link, or do we have any info, or am I being too conspiracy theorist? Is there any link between the cost of bulky waste collection and increased domestic fly tipping? Do we have any info on that? And also linked to that, is there any data on the link between fly tipping items and the items that we don't collect as bulky waste? Do we capture anything around that? Yeah, thank you.
Can I take?
Sorry.
I was going to ask you, is that your questions? Thank you.
There's Bollywood films that are shorter than that, Councillor Dunstall. Thank you very much for your questions. So I'm going to start with the parking. I just want to kind of give the gravity and scale of this project. You know, just to look at nearly 1 million people using visitor permits. And so in that, if you get 200 complaints a week, then obviously 200 complaints a week sounds a lot, but you're looking at 117,000 households, and you're looking at including businesses and visitors here. So I think we need to always look at scale and proportionality when we take a look at how we're working. That said, I think we've learned a lot of lessons here around how we implement kind of modal shifting change, whether that be moving people to technology or moving people out of their cars or making people recycle more. It's how we bring people with us. But this was a really ambitious project. I do think that there are some, I was actually doing some visitor permit stuff myself today, and it is still got some issues on it where you just think, why didn't they just put the button there? And this is where the stuff for the OPM that we're expecting in the summer is going to rectify. I think it was right for us to not just ask IT people to fix it, because IT people are the ones who designed this in the first place. And it was better that we got a response from asking residents what they think would work better in businesses, and then design around their kind of feedback. In terms of the waste survey, so the waste survey has taken us all by surprise, because nobody expected 9,000 people to want to talk about rubbish that much. So 9,000 respondents, that's not just people, sorry, that includes businesses, faith groups, charity organisations, etc. 9,000 responses is twice as many as the council's previous record. Obviously, I held that record too, so I'm all right about it. That one was on council tax. So I do feel that we are, because we weren't expecting that volume, we are now having to spend time going over more. I mean, if I like to think I'm ambitious, but I think me and Beth were hoping for 2,000, and we built the timeline for a kind of 2,000. That said, this is part of a 2-year program. So this is all about what we do after post 2025 when the Veolia contract comes to an end. And that was the purpose of this. And so I think what's happened in the past, before we had Haringey deal and co-production, is we won't ask residents what they think of our idea until probably the end of 2024, and then go ahead with it. What we've done here is we've got residents involved at the beginning stage of designing the spec, so that when we do look at what the service looks like, it's based on what they said. So I am going to say that people are not going to hear and not going to see until post 2025, because this is the whole point. They're designing the contract or the options of whether we bring in-house, out-house for 2025. So I think there is going to be a gap, but nothing will change before 2025, because that's the whole point. So, yeah.
To come back really quickly, I just wonder whether or not it would be prudent, just through the same mechanism through which we got the survey out there, just to say to people, you know, this is, thank you so much, we have 9,000 respondents, blah, 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 blah. This is the next step. This is a process. Could people forget, and then people throw it back at us and say, you asked us about this 2 years ago and now you know, but.
I think that's really valuable feedback, and I think what you're telling me is that that hasn't been done, so I need to double check that, because That's what I saw on the comm strategy. Well, even if it has been done, it obviously hasn't been. If a ward councillor doesn't know about it, we haven't done it well. So thank you for that feedback, and we'll take that back and get that. You will get so bored of hearing that message after today, because you will just hear about it again and again. In terms of the fly tipping, so I think there are different streams of fly tipping. So we know from our data that there is about 82% of our fly tipping is actually misplaced household waste, which isn't actually technically legally fly tipping, it's just misplaced household waste. So with that, there's been a lot of work being done to make sure that people had a place to put their misplaced waste. People don't just get up in the morning and think they're going to put their eggshells in a carrier bag and leave it by a lamppost. There are reasons behind it, whether it's the fact that they haven't got the right bins, they have no bins because they live above a shop, etc. So one of the things that we've been doing is rolling out the bin containments, both the black grit boxes, but also the Metro store, to give people the opportunity to do the right thing. We haven't seen as many out of borough dumps, mainly because when we did see that, it was mainly commercial type building waste. And because of COVID restrictions, there hasn't been as much building, but that's starting to speed up a little bit, and you're starting to see that. What we are seeing a lot of is actually what looks like landlord evictions, carrier bags for the clothes, mattresses, really cheap kind of MDF furniture, but the eviction rate is going high, and we're expecting that to kind of follow on with that. In terms of your question about the bulky waste, actually, that's a really interesting situation. So we introduced bulky waste charges in 2015 as part of a financial MTFS saving. And actually, it hasn't really made a difference either way. I guess if you're that sort of person that's going to sneak out at 3 o'clock in the morning to dump your mattress, you're not the sort of person that's going to check whether, how do you get rid of your waste, I would say, though, that our prices are quite competitive, and it's really interesting when people moan and then they phone a private company and it's 80 quid for a man with a van, and they find out that they can get 4 items for 20 quid. That said, our neighbouring borough, Enfield, have introduced free bulky waste collections for non-electrical items, so your sofas, mattresses. I just want to go back to the data again. 80-something% of the waste that is dumped is household waste. So if we want to concentrate on the 20%, or what Enfield have done is the non-electrical bulky items, so your sofa and your mattresses, you're literally putting all your attention on about 10% of the issue. And I really want to focus strategically on the big beast. I want to go for the big apples, and the big apples is the 80%.
Councillor Ali.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to whiz through this, and I'll start with the positives, because I think that's really important. So you remember, Mark, when I was last here, I had a lot to say about the parking management system, to say the least. I have to say, I think we've come a long way in a positive way. I would welcome the improvements. My one plea would be to learn from what happened the first time round, and to really ensure that last step in that slide really happens, that user testing, because I think that was the issue with the attempt, that we really rolled out something without seeing how it interfaces with the public. So I think that has to be something that we need to sort of really keep in mind. There are a few reports. Councillor Chadwell sent me a message this afternoon about some of the apps still not. Yeah, Ringo in particular. I don't know if it's the fact that it's down on their end, or we've not put the new numbers up, but hopefully that's been sorted. But
was that in terms of a post on Twitter?
Yes.
So we think that the person's actually used the phone number, not the Ringo app, because if you look at the Ringo app, it's absolutely spot on. It gives you that exact location.
Yeah, one of the two. That's quite common too. Well, not common here, but it's common elsewhere. I just thought I'd flag that. In terms of other positives, I think the consultation approach that we took for the waste was probably the most extensive example of good practice I've seen Haringey do in a very long time. It was, I mean, you couldn't get away from it really. I couldn't go to a mosque, a church, a library, a meeting, a community, an RA without talking about this consultation. So I think hats off to people involved in it. I think it's something that might be good internally for people to speak about within the service. Because I really think one of the things we've been very bad at historically is that, and again, I know it's part of the Haringey deal, is that we just don't, we do it in a very sort of formulaic way. We've consulted, but we've not actually really sought people out. And I think we really did seek people out. And I think the ward engagement was exemplar, I thought. And the final positive I want to end on is on the highways. I think it's really welcome that we acknowledge how the extent of the challenge, to put it nicely, especially pedestrianised footpaths in the borough. And I think one of the things I'd be interested to see would be also the cabinet report, and in the future some sort of way engaging people in terms of using common space. I know ward councils are very heavily involved. Council Transwine knows that I have a very unhealthy interest in this issue, but I would think that getting people involved, something as practical as, for example, works are being done on one stretch of White Hart Lane, which is very industrial, which I think is well overdue, but the schools and nurseries, for example, are just not done first. And I think it's that formulaic process of how do we prioritise work? There might be a logic or wisdom behind it. Maybe it is being done, but I do think there's an element of location sort of thing. Just on some of the actual scrutiny elements now, very quickly. I've got a number of concerns in terms of the ability for us to track and enforce pay permit abuse on event days. So I know at the moment, I do support the idea of retaining the paper element. I think it's really important, but it'd be good to understand how do we track that abuse. I know the Turan system's great at limiting numbers, and I think that's where we got issues in the beginning. People didn't know that. So they were like, it's only giving me 7, it's only giving me 9. But I think that's good. But I do think there's still an issue to be done in terms of how do we link the enforcement, the serial number, with actually saying this person's clearly abusing paper permits. So that's one thing I wanted to flag. In terms of waste, I think I'll be very interested to see a ward by ward breakdown. I know we rely heavily on Veolia street cleaners and reporting from the app, which is logical from a sort of data gathering exercise, but I really would like to see a ward by ward breakdown in terms of where officers think there are hotspots, because I've written to officers in the past about specific areas and it's like a revelation to them, which I think is a revelation to me, because it's not a revelation. It's been quite well established that is a hotspot. You just need to have lived there or walked by there. And again, maybe using common spaces as well, I think would be really good, something really interactive with the public. We can signpost, and I think it's really engaging residents to actually be resident focused. Coming back to fly tipping, I think another real bugbear I have, I think we're really good at responding in terms of the act to a complaint, but I think we're really poor in responding to the response. So I've had a number of residents, and even myself as the councillor, you don't know what happens. So you probably know this as well. I'm, again, an unhealthy interest in reporting fly tipping personally, with very graphic details, clear details. I know you probably think I walk the streets of Haringey at night. I promise you I don't. I mean, but yeah, it gives you an idea. But I do think there's an issue of we're not communicating with the residents in terms of responding back. We've not done this, we can't do this, we are doing this. And I think that's really important in terms of building trust people to then keep on reporting. I think that has been missing for some time. And on the commercial element, and this issue affects my ward because we have everything. We've got the commercial units, industrial, small flats, you name it. One of the things I have been pressing people in the past is actually for us to go for similar to what our neighbouring authorities do, which is to use the sticker system. Because I know the moment a commercial entity can say, here's a bit of paper, we have a commercial license, but we don't really ask more questions about, do we think that premises and the volume of bags that you're issued, or the literage or the tonnage is suitable for the amount of waste you're producing. And I think we do sometimes take it on face value, and that's what really creates a lot of mistrust. And final point, I would really love it if we took, and I know this might be slightly controversial, but I really would love it if we took the sort of CPN approach to fly tipping enforcement and actually make use of bailiffs if we have to. And the reason why I say that, it's very common practice in neighbouring boroughs to actually go through that. If you don't pay, instead of waiting a year or two in the courts, we will go after using sort of other alternative debt collection methods. I know with ethical debt policy, and I'm sure there's a way to make it work within that policy. But I do think it's far less controversial to the public to use bailiffs for that than other things like council tax. Thank you.
Are those all your questions?
They are. They are.
Councillor Ali. Right, we want a whistle-stop tour, so
Thank you.
hit the ground running.
So firstly, thank you for your feedback on the Toronto. I just want to mention.
Okay, I've got it. Go ahead, Councillor.
Thank you. So firstly, in response to your stuff around Toronto, I think that's noted, and user testing is a big issue. I guess one of the things is where it's really failing the most is actually on Safari, and no one really decided to use a test on that. I'm an iPhone person. I didn't like that at all when I found that one out. I just wanted to mention one thing about it though, about the paper permits. For me, one of the things that this brought out is who needs the paper permits? I mean, this is so much more convenient, right? You don't have to get down to Wood Green or Marcus Garvey Library, don't have to do this, don't have to wait in a queue, don't have to take half a day off work. There's so many great things about being able to do this at 2 o'clock in the morning in your own house. And the people that were kind of, when we looked and done some analysis, was actually people who were receiving care at home. And so for me, there is an identification of an issue that people receiving care at home have high levels of immobility and therefore can't be expected to log on and can't be expected to sometimes let in 3 or 4 carers a day. So the care at home permit is coming to Cabinet this month and will be activated by the beginning of May. And what we will see then is a sharp drop of people needing to firstly go on to get the paper permits, but also those people that are struggling to get on and no one need to log on anymore because they can just use this 3-year permit. Just to go on to the not so positive bits of your thing. I think the paper abuse around Spurs, around the match day, it's been a long-term problem. And we are working using the paper-based permits to see and using, as you said, serial numbers. What I will say, though, it's a massive, considerable drop to where it was when we only had scratch card permits. You could go around to most shops around Tottenham and buy them just like you could buy a Mars bar. So we knew that was happening. People were coming to customer service centre and buying 1,000 at a time. Now, I'm quite a popular girl, but I've never needed 1,000 visitor permits. And when you did go around with the CEOs on match day, you did see loads of visitor permits in everyone's window. And you're like, who are all of you people? So we knew that. So what I really want to say is we understand the problem's still there, but a large majority of it, because we've moved on to the virtual permit, has shifted. The last thing I want to say is if you bought a visitor's permit, you can buy as many as you want. Yes, you can buy up to 9 in one transaction. You can keep doing that and buy 90 in 10 transactions or 900 in 100 transactions. You can only activate 2 at any one time. So you could probably sell it to a Spurs fan for a tenner and make 20 quid, but you ain't going to make the thousands you made before. So we have nipped it in the bud. In terms of ward by ward breakdown, we used to actually do that pre-2022 intake. The reason that we haven't done it now is because the ward boundaries have changed. And so it's been really hard to change how we record that data to get that out. So we're working on that to make sure that all ward councillors have a quarterly update on where their top 10 fly tips are and what types of issues, what types of fly tips it is, etc. So we'll get that out, and we're really sorry it's taken us some time to, I mean, I'm not going to apologise too much. I think the police still use their old ward boundaries, so we're not going that bad, but it hasn't been great. I think you're right about the fact that if you report something to be cleaned up, like a mattress or something, it gets done within 24 hours, and that's really positive feedback for the Veolia contracts. That's one of the things we measure them on. What's not great is when somebody is emailing to say, it's number 62, why are you not doing anything about him? I think what we have here is an absence of technology. I would much rather the enforcement team are out in the ground going around and issuing these FPNs or CPWs or CPNs, then sitting in an email trying to manually respond back to everybody. So what we're looking at the moment is how technology can help that. How do we close the case and you get it on your app to say this is what we've done? There is a legal issue with FPNs. We can't give you as much information because of GDPR of what action we've taken. So if you told us number 65 has done something, we can't tell you that we find him. What we can do is if it goes to court and his name is published, then we can tell you that we find him. But actually PCNs, CPNs and FPNs are confidential. So sometimes we can't report back. But I do agree with you that we need to make people realise that they've invested time to tell us something and they don't know what we've done about it. And then the automatic thing is we ain't done nothing. So we need to figure out how we get around that. In terms of community protection notices, I think it might be helpful if we looked at what all of these PNs are, whether they're FPNs, CPNs, PCNs. They're actually delegated court powers. So it's the idea is that I give you something and you can settle it out of court by paying the £400 because you're guilty and you pay it. And therefore we're not clogging up the courts. Now, if you don't want to pay or you don't think that you've done it, then it automatically goes to court anyway, whether it's a CPN, an FPN, etc. So I guess what we have to do is make sure we apply the right law and what PN is applicable to that law. So if it's on private land and there's something not quite right, we can issue a community protection warning. And then if they don't pay, it goes to being a notice, and then if they don't pay, then it goes, if they don't do what's in the warning, then it goes into a notice, and if they don't pay, it goes to court. So that's probably what you've seen in other boroughs, and we do that too. But we couldn't give a CPN to somebody who's fly tip because the legal thing is to give them a PCN, FPN, and just like we can't give a PCN to somebody because that's only for parking. So it's just, there's different things for different people, but they all end with CN and it drives me bonkers.
Thank you very much, Seema, and you, I should say Councillor Chandwali. The next is Councillor Worrell. Please, can you give your questions to the panel?
Yeah, thank you. First one, something that I still get cropping up relatively often is people who've reported an issue via the Love Clean Streets app getting a notification that it's been closed or resolved when it hasn't. And that obviously really annoys people when they can see, for example, the lamp post in front of them that's still faultily on 24 hours a day. So is that something systematic that's going wrong there? And are we aware of it? And what are we doing to fix it? Next point, somewhat niche, but I was made aware of it via a piece of casework. So Haringey residents don't have access to the Corporation of London's hazardous waste scheme, which I think most other boroughs do. And so I had a resident who was trying to sort of sustainably dispose of some oil-based paint, and she was basically told you have to just chuck it away. And so what are we doing to kind of address that gap, and are we aware of any other gaps in those kind of different specific types of recycling? I've had a couple of reports of issues with the gully cleaning schedule, and I just wondered, is that all on track? I believe there might have been some operational issues that threw things off earlier in the year, so how is that going? Are we close to having all the gullies cleaned? Oh, it was just an example of one road in our ward where the signs had gone up saying, can you all move your cars? The gullies are going to be cleaned on this date. And then that never went ahead. And then the signs were still there kind of rotting away, and they were wondering, when are they actually going to get cleaned? And then there was another discrepancy around the dates then for when that was going to be done. So yeah, that was it basically. Thank you. Those are my points.
Thank you. I'm going to start with the last one first and work my way up, because I'm hoping that my lovely colleague next to me is going to tell me about the hazardous waste stuff. That's my idea. So with the gully cleansing, we have 18,000 gullies in Haringey. And to do what we're about to do, what we haven't done for years and what we started to do last year, is a really complicated logistic, mainly because most of the gullies are under cars. So most people they're on the bit where people park their car, and if they don't move it, we can't clean it. So what used to happen up until last year is we would go around, and if there was a car there, we'd be like, okay, and then we wouldn't be back. And now, if you live on a road where there's always a car there, it turned out that your gully wasn't clean for 10, maybe plus more years, and then it started to really cake up, and it was so we took a decision last year to firstly invest in it, but also put in a whole operation like we would do if we were going to do line marking or tarmacking, etc., which is basically you have to, the parking's suspended, you can't park here, and we're being really strict on it. If we take an average terraced house with 25 gullies, 18 of them could take 20 minutes each. What I call the elephant, the big suction machine will come in, suck it out, done. And then there could be just that one that doesn't open. And then we're there for 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours trying to crack it open. Then it breaks. Then we can't leave it like that. Or we go into another gully and we realise that actually there's a big issue here and we need Thames water to go in. So when we logistically plan what roads we're going to go on and how long it takes, we've got a rough idea that we could be doing a set of roads within a 3-day period. So we put out parking suspension because legally we have to give 7 days notice for parking suspension. Now, if we're stuck on a road, so if we think we're going to do all 8 of those roads in 3 days and everything goes fine, everyone's happy. If we're stuck on one road for 2 of those 3 days, then unfortunately the rest of the roads are not going to be done. So we have to start the whole process again. The other thing that does happen is we turn up to a road and people haven't moved their cars. And so the crew need to move to the next road. And then by the time they've done the next road and the next road, they haven't got time to come back. And so therefore we have to reschedule the gully cleansing. So the big message, the big comms message that we're sending, and we do it every month, is we let people know roughly what ward we're coming to. We put this stuff up, but if you want it done fast and you want everyone not to have to wait for the next time and the next time and the next time, is move your car. So that's the big message that we've got to send over. On some places we do one side of the road and we allow people to park on the other side of the road, vice versa, because there's got nowhere to park. So it's a big logistical operation. But if you're worried that we've missed the road and we haven't come back in the last few months, then please let me know. But they are being really militant this time because we cannot go through what we went through 18 months ago. Absolutely no way. In terms of Love Clean Streets app, the example you used there was UK Power Network, and I think we do have a problem there. So I guess one of the things, firstly, we don't own Love Clean Streets app. It's an app that's developed by somebody called BB Bits, and then we buy into it because it's got everyone's downloaded it. We might as well use it. Street lighting is a really good classical example. So the best way to describe a street light is that it's got several parents. So if somebody says to us, the street light's out, we're the first parent to go out. Is it the lamp? No. Is it the light? No. Nothing to do with us. And if it's the electricity supply, we have to defer it to UK Power Network. We're not allowed to test electrics. So what somebody in our office is doing is case closed. And then because their job is finished and they've sent it to UK Power Network, and then UK Power Network will tell you that they've got a 28-day turnaround and this is what happens. So we need to make sure that we're really working with BB Bits to have another thing saying, instead of just saying open, closed, that there is another let you know that it's been referred and where you find the next information. So this is a really good example of how BB Bits is great if they just need to tell you open and closed questions, but actually giving you back information like what happened to your fly tipping evidence or what's happened to your street lighting. If it's deferred to someone else, it just says closed. So we are working on that, and thanks for raising that. I'm hoping I've got enough time now to tell you about the hazardous scheme. Or can I hand over to Beth on that one?
Yeah, so we had an inquiry from you, Councillor Cole. Oh, okay, yes. So I did speak to the officer. You're right, there is a gap. So the contract was awarded, it was a 5-year contract and it was awarded in 2020. At the time, the officers, and we're trying to find the information as to how they came to this decision, decided to exclude that from the contract on the basis of getting a more cost-effective option. So I'm not sure what the data was, as I say, to that decision. It is a gap. We have contacted NLWA in the first instance, because I think the basis also for them doing that was that NLWA would be able to take it at the RRC, but I understand that's not the case. So we are chasing NLWA to see what can be done. The contract does expire in 2025. We'll also contact the Corporation of London to see the feasibility of changing it, and what that means. I suppose it's probably just worth saying that's the first time, I've been here 2 years, just over 2 years. That's the first thing, I'm not trying to make out that it's not an important issue, but that's the first inquiry I've ever seen about it. But that's not to say there isn't a need. So we will look at it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for those robust answers. And Councillor Calverwell, can you please put your questions to the panel?
Sorry for coming late. Anyway, my question is, I know we don't live in Dickensian times, but the population has increased. And with the population increasing, so has the garbage. Is there a possibility, or are there measures in case any kind of plague or anything breaks out with all this excessive garbage?
Thank you. I guess that would be a question for Councillor Des Nevis under Public Health. Brian's not a cabinet member yet, but he might be soon. But yeah, it's one that I can pass on to Councillor Des Nevis to give you a written answer.
Ian, did you have any questions that you wanted to pose?
I already asked some, but if I may have just two quickies.
Yes, please.
One, again, sorry, this looks a bit anarchy, but I have actually read the papers, so I might as well ask. And I'm wondering if this is also a typo, but the figure for investment in highways, there's a big disparity in it between two of the paragraphs. And I'm wondering if it's actually a typo or a totally different item. Paragraph 3.6 on page 30 says a proposed investment of 7.385 million for 2023-4, and in paragraph 5.4 it talks about 8.97 million, and I think there may be different things.
So can you just say that
3.6 and 5.4. This is talking about investment in highways. And 3.6 says 7.385 and 5.4 says 8.97. And there's such big difference that I'm wondering if it's something, I'm missing something here or I've misread it.
It's one street lighting and one street lighting and one is highways, right? Like one is the carriageways and pavements and the other one from point 5 onwards is a street lighting investment.
Ah, right, okay. So there are two different.
Yeah.
Right, okay, great.
Actually double the money, if you think about it, because you've got the one on
Right.
the highways.
Yeah, I knew there had to be an answer because there's such a disparity. Yeah. And the other question really is just about the premises which generate the worst sort of dumping issues, which we all know are HMOs and similar sorts of premises. And I'm sure everybody around this table could name properties in their local area which have been a problem for a very long time. And I'm just wondering about the links between Brian's officers and the private sector housing people, and how far you're actually able now to have some sort of impact on those landlords in general and on their licence, given that all of these properties should now be licensed, and what sort of chances there are of the licence being revoked or reduced or whatever, because those are the worst offending properties, I think, by far.
So what I would say, firstly, is that we are aware of that link. I wouldn't say that they're the worst. I would say that there is different temperatures from across the different from across the borough. So different things are happening. We've got places that have quite a lot of industrial space. and therefore you will see some of the fly tipping can be related to that. You've got wards such as Haringey Ward and around the ladders where there is a high level of HMOs, and therefore the types of waste and the issue seems a bit more clearer. And so across the borough, you just see a different picture of different things. But going back to the HMO, we obviously are aware it's a problem, and it's a problem in quite a few wards. Haringey Ward being one of them, Northumberland Park being another, Knoll Park being another. So we've actually got some funding at the moment to recruit a HMO enforcement officer. It's a joint piece of work between planning and Hubert's team for community safety, who'll be working with Brian to do that exact piece of work and tie it into the selective licensing issues. What I will say is, if you are a sort of landlord that has already understood what selective licensing is and got yourself through that jargon and then got yourself to actually be licensed and passed all the tests to be licensed, the chances are is you're probably not some of the HMOs we're worried about. The ones you need to be worried about are the ones that no one knows about, that are actually illegal, not registered, have holding companies set up with a holding company, set up with another holding company abroad, and you can never find the owner. And so you start to find yourself in quite murky grounds. And there's also a whole load of other issues with beds and sheds, human slavery, and we have a lot of stuff where the number of mopeds in the front garden gives you an indication of how many people are actually living in that house, and how one wheelie bin is never going to be sufficient. And then you start to build a picture of issues. So I do agree that HMOs is one of the tenets and factors that we should be concerned about, and we're doing a piece of work there. But I actually think that waste is always seen as the issue and not the consequences of bigger stories. And I've always said that when I retire, I'm going to write a whole series of books called The Tales Behind the Bins, because there you find everything. You find out about human slavery, you find out about children that are unregistered, you find out about a lot of things, and it's coming all from the bins. Because that will start to tell you what's happening. But HMOs is obviously one of them, but I just don't want to give the impression that it's the only thing. There is so many other factors, and if it was that simple just to get a whole load of HMO officers, we would have done that years ago.
Thank you very much, Councillor Chandwani. The councillors have actually asked the questions that are most of the questions that I was going to ask anyway. So Councillor Worrell partially asked my question. So there's just one little bit that I want to dig down on. It's a little bin strategy, and it's 5.1. And it's about the Love Clean Streets app. And I'm just wondering what provision is made for poverty of IT deprivation for, residents within the area and their inability to use the app. Because I don't want I wouldn't want a counterproductive situation where they couldn't access it and then they become the ones that are having the fines for not disposing of their rubbish or alerting people to what's going on. So I'm just wondering, just an overview of what is there any detail looking at those ones that don't use it? And the reason why I'm saying that, although I'm, I work in the care industry and I got degrees, I can't stand using those apps. I really just prefer the paper. And the ward that I have a lot of elderly parishioners who don't use things, and we have to do so many different modifications. So I'm just thinking about what's our thinking to kind of capture them and not using the apps. And that's my question. And then there are two questions from Councillor Hymas, who is not here, but there's just two. So I'm just wondering if you could address those, please, and then my little one, and then we might be finished just on time.
So Councillor Hymas, give apologies, but has submitted a couple of points or questions that they wanted to raise around the parking charge review, the link between linking a parking charge to the vehicle's emissions, and the other point is removing the tariffs across the borough. Does that make sense?
I've just looked back on the report. So what the report is saying on the is that at the moment, if there is a problem with a litter bin, then there is no way of identifying that litter bin. So, for example, if there's a problem with a street light, every street light has a little sticker on it or a tag on it that gives you a number, and that tells us which one of the 15,000 street lights it is. Otherwise, you'll have someone phoning going, yeah, the street light's broken in Tottenham. Like, do you know what I mean? So we don't know. And actually what's happening right now is that we've got that, yeah, the bin's broken on Green Lanes. Green Lanes where? So what we're planning on doing is actually putting a identification number on every single street bin. And so when people report it, then they can be quite specific like they are about street lights with an identification number. Because we want people to report fly tipping or any kinds of environmental issues, both environmental crime, but street lights, etc. People can phone Biolia for any waste-related issues. They can email for any waste-related issues, and if it's any stuff that's in the highways, parking, potholes, etc., then they can still phone customer services or they can still email customer services. And both things with Viola and our own, you can also tweet and you can also go through Facebook. So we've got all of the channels open because we want as many people as possible to tell us all of these things, because we've had to cut back so much on highways inspectors, etc. So the team love it when they get a photograph and an actual location, because then it's just all they've got to do is the final bit. So it really helps. It's a really good piece of work done with residents. In terms of Councillor Hymas's question, so I understand that because she was kind enough to also email this to me today because she knew she wasn't going to be here. In terms of making sure that we use parking charges to kind of tackle climate change is kind of her essence of her question. So we've got a 3 or 4 year plan. We're saying all 4 because it might carry on. I don't want to put years to it. I think it will go ahead for forever. This is a really big moving beast. I would say about 3 or 4 years ago, nobody put the connection between parking charges and environment together. And now we've seen it actually. And how do you make parking charges tougher to stop people driving the highest emitting cars, diesel cars, etc. Haringey have been really on the board on this. So in the last 2 years, we have brought in a diesel surcharge. So anyone with a diesel car here gets charged an extra 25%. And if you park on any of the pay by phone Ringo things, you also get hit by 25% levy. If you're a household that has more than one car, then you get the second car levy. So we've already started to introduce these things, but there's a lot more to do and there's a lot more we can do. One of the things that we are looking at is to see if the technology is there, and we know that another borough, I think Lambeth, are looking at actually CO2 emissions based parking outside shops. So if you've got an electric car, it'd be cheaper, and if you've got a low emitting car, it will be this tariff. So a bit like your CPZ permit, because at the moment it's a flat rate, or you get a little bit of you get 25% levy if you're a diesel car. But actually, I understand that there is now a change in the technology, and there's possibly something we can do there. The review of the tariffs, and I know Councillor Ali's raised this as well. So back in the day, before this was seen as something you could do to tackle climate change, people used parking to inject life into businesses and high streets. And so what they did on high streets with high footfall, like Green Lanes, Crouch End, Broadway, and Wood Green High Road, is you would get a high tariff. But if you were seen as a non-prime high street, so Middleton Road, you would get a lower parking tariff in the hope that people would be encouraged to park there. Obviously, our policies changed since then, and we want people to take more forms of active travel and walk and use public transport. So we're doing a massive review of whether we should just have one flat rate across the whole borough, being really clear that actually take a bus or take a bike or walk, etc. Bearing in mind that people with disabilities are allowed to park free across the borough. So there's already that equity in the service. That is not going to be popular. And so when we do that and how we do that, especially as businesses have come out of COVID, and there is a cost of living crisis, and businesses are closing, is where we politically think about when is the right time to do that. And at the moment, it's not now. But the review on, we're constantly looking at what other boroughs are doing to see how they're using parking, and we are doing a banding review at the moment to see, because we've got 13 bands, Enfield have got 5. So maybe there's a trick we're missing here, to see if we can discourage more people. I hope that answers her questions, but please let her know that she can continue the conversation.
Thank you very much, Councillor Chandwali. We are bang on 9 o'clock, but there is, I'll hand it over to you, Philip. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming, and I really appreciate it. It's been my first maiden voyage being the chair of this panel, and it has been and it has been all nice fireworks, so thank you.
Yeah, very quickly. So just to draw the panel's attention to the work programme for this year, which is on page 35 of the agenda pack. Obviously, this is the last meeting of the municipal year, so it's just for noting the work plan for this year. And going forward, the work programme for next year will be developed as and when we have the membership for the committee.
Thank you very much, everyone, and good night.